Hey guys, welcome back for Eclipses and Tides. So the moon plays an important role in both of these things. That's why it is included in our little moon to it, because I know both did it. Okay, so eclipses. So the moon does not travel in its revolution does not just go like this, to where it passes in front of the Earth, directly between the Earth and the sun all the time, and when it goes directly more at an angle. So there are times where it will fall behind the Earth in its shadow, and times where it will cast a shadow on Earth. When that happens, that is going to be an eclipse. So you are types of eclipse. You're going to have an eclipse and a lunar eclipse. So whenever this object, known as the moon, so an eclipse is basically when an object in space comes in between the sun and a third object. So that's going to be our planet Earth. So the moon passes in between the sun and the Earth. So that's going to be an eclipse. This can happen for other planets as well, but when it happens here on Earth, it's because of this little guy. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Maybe. My internet connection is not the best right now. There it goes. Okay, so a solar eclipse, that is when the moon is going to cast a shadow on the Earth. Okay, so obviously this is not the real Earth, this is not the real moon, but this is size-wise, it's comparable. So notice when I have this, if I have this little moon pass in front of the Earth, its shadow is not going to cover the entire Earth because it's smaller. So we are just going to get a solar eclipse that is visible to certain people, as you can see here in this picture. So the moon does not create a big enough shadow to cover the whole Earth to see a solar eclipse when it happens. So it's rare that it does happen, and then when it happens, you may not see it as well because it doesn't. You aren't in that shadow area. So solar eclipses. That's why we made such a big deal out of the last one. You guys actually got off school and everything for it. So that is what happens during a solar eclipse. Moon goes in between the sun and the Earth, and the moon casts a shadow on the Earth. This is what we call the umbra. It is the dark part of the shadow. The penumbra is the lighter part of the shadow. So this is like the zone of totality. If you are going to fall in the umbra, it's going to get dark during that eclipse, and then it'll get light again. If you're in the penumbra, it'll get a little bit darker, but not as dark as if you were in the umbra. Okay, so a lunar eclipse, see if my computer wants to work. Probably not. There we go. Is more likely to happen because this is when the moon falls in the shadow of the Earth. So it's back here. Notice how big the Earth is and how small the moon is. So obviously when the moon passes behind this, the whole moon is getting a shadow. What it's going to look like from Earth, it's going to look like kind of a red moon because it's still going to be trying to reflect that light from the sun. It's just bent a little bit more, so it's going to be this red glow to it. So you can see here, sun, earth, moon, and the moon is obviously falling in the shadow of the earth because it's so much smaller than the earth. Okay? A total lunar eclipse can be seen anywhere on Earth. Okay? Like a total solar eclipse, you have to be in that path. Total lunar, you can see it anywhere. Okay? All right, then the next thing that affects the moon, oh, I gotta move myself, I'm right in the middle of a writing, is the tides. So two things, the moon's gravity and the sun's gravity are going to play a role in the tides. But we have on Earth at all times, there are two high tides and there are two low tides. Don't know the tide schedule here right now, so I don't know what it is on the island right now. But it could be that get a high here, you're going to get another high tide. In between those high tides, you guessed it, you have a low tide. So about every 6 hours, the tide is either going to be all the way up for high tide or all the way out for low tide. Okay, low tide is always better if you would like to go to the beach more. All right, so look at why we get these high tides. Got to move myself again, I'm in the writing. Why we get high tides and why we get low tides. So high tides, you're going to get high tides. If this is that lovely lineup again, you're going to get high tides when you are side of Earth that is closest to the moon and farthest from the moon. So if you are close to the moon or farthest, so it would be these 2 points. If my moon was here, it's going to be these 2 points. You're going to experience the high tide, okay? So what happens is on this near side, the one that's closest to the moon's gravity is pulling a little bit more strongly here, so the water wants to go forward. And then what's happening is the moon's gravity is pulling more weakly on it, so it kind of falls back. This is the water that's kind of left behind. So the water is like being pulled this way towards it, or it's falling back and kind of like left behind. Okay, so this is the side that was left behind, and this is the side that's getting the stronger pull. And then these would be your low tide area. Okay, so let's take a picture. Let's take a look. Earth fell again. 2 for 2 on the Earth falling in videos. So here we have the moon. So the side that is closest to the moon is going to have a high tide, and the side that is farthest from the moon is going to have a high tide. And then your other 2 areas on Earth is going to have a low tide. So over here, remember, the moon has that stronger pull on the water there, so it wants to go towards it. And then over here, it's got a weaker pull, but this is kind of like that water that was like left behind. It didn't really go towards the moon because the pull wasn't strong enough, so it's just chilling back. It's left behind. Then in between, you're going to have the low tides. So the low tides are going to be halfway in between the high tide. So if I have a high tide here and a high tide on the other side of Earth, low tide is going to be in between them. Okay? So whatever we have a low tide, this would be our position to the Earth. But then we're going to rotate, and we're going to have a high tide again, and we're going to rotate, and we'll have a low tide again. Okay? So depending on where we are compared to the moon is going to depend on our tide. So that stronger pull or no pull. Well, not no pull, but a weaker pull. Okay, you have 2 different types of tides. You have besides high and low tide. These are kind of special tides. You have what we call a spring tide, and then you have a neap tide. So a spring tide is when the moon, earth, and sun are all in a line. So this is going to happen during your new moon phase and your full moon phase, when those guys are all in a line. And what happens is, if this is your high tide over here and this is your low tide, you've got a big difference between it because everything's in a line, so it's going to pull even more. So big difference between high tide and low tide. It's the biggest difference we'll have in the entire month. Okay? Neap tide, so if this is my spring tide, it has the biggest difference between it. Neap tide is going to be the opposite. It has the least difference between it. So my high tide is not going up as high, and my low tide is not going out as far. Excuse me, and this is going to be during your first quarter and your third quarter, or last quarter phases. So when the moon, earth, and sun are at right angles, that's when you're going to have your neap tide. So high tide isn't going up as far, low tide isn't going out as far. So it's going to be here instead of your spring tide, which is here, okay? And that is going to occur, so spring tide, big difference, is during new moon and full moon. Neap tide, little difference, is during first quarter and third quarter, or last quarter, okay? That's all I got for the tides and eclipses. Again, if you ever have any questions, shoot me an email, post something on Google Classroom, or text me through the Mind. I hope you guys are doing well. Bye.